Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Minnesota American Promise discussion on big election spenders. As you know, American Promise is a cross-partisan nonprofit working solely on the passage and ratification of an amendment to the United States Constitution that will enable Congress and the states to regulate campaign contributions and expenditures. During this discussion, you may hear about other campaign finance or election reforms, but the amendment is the only focus of American Promise. We're kicking off this discussion series on big election spenders with the topic of LLCs and 501Cs. How are they used to try to influence our elections? We're very pleased to have Professor Richard Painter here with us, but before I introduce him, we have a few announcements. Minnesota American Promise has moved our monthly meetings to the fourth Monday of the month at 7 p.m. If you've already signed up for the meetings, the link has been updated and you should have been notified. If you're interested in joining us, the link will be emailed to you with the follow-up from this event. Our topic on Monday, April 26th, will be how to advocate for the amendment in a cross-partisan manner. We'll come up with some simple talking points that will resonate with people regardless of their political leanings. Speaking of advocating, we have bills in both the Minnesota State Legislature, thanks to our allies, and Congress. In the state legislature, move to amend's resolution is House Bill HF 868 and Senate Bill SF 940. And the Wolf Pack has an Article 5 convention call, which is HF 429 in the House and SF 390 in the Senate. Those will be in the chat. And our National Citizen Leader Conference and Lobby Day is May 2nd through the 6th, and the link to the sign up is also listed in the chat. We'll be lobbying Congress for support of the bipartisan Bill HJ-Res 1, not to be confused with HR 1. This is an amendment proposal, so HJ-Res 1. And that's the Democracy for All Amendment. And HJ-Res 48, the Move to Amend amendment proposal. Now to the topic at hand. Most of you are probably familiar with Professor Richard Painter, corporate law professor at the U and former chief White House ethics lawyer in the George W. Bush administration. His resume is much longer, of course. Richard has made headlines in various ways over the past few years. Regardless of how you came to know of him, he has the strongest stance on ethics of anyone I can think of. If you follow him on Twitter, and I suggest you do, he brings to light ethics-related issues and does not hold back. Richard has been a good friend to American Promise and is a founding board member of Take Back Our Republic, a conservative partner organization of ours. That organization also published his book, Taxation Only with Representation. Please keep in mind that Richard is not representing the University of Minnesota in this discussion. His views he will express are his own. Richard, thank you for joining us today. On the call, we have citizens from throughout the state of Minnesota, plus a few chapter leaders from other states.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Vicki. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning to talk about the role of corporate money in politics. Limited liability companies, whether corporations, LLCs, limited partnerships, all the different types of corporate entities that are formed to protect the interests of the owners. But remember, limited liability means they don't necessarily pay for the debts of the firm when the firm goes bust. We all know about that. The question is, what is their role, their proper role in politics? This is a very old problem. It's a problem the founders were well aware of at the time of the American Revolution and the framing of the Constitution. Great Britain had had experiences with corruption of Parliament by limited liability companies. The South Sea Company in 1720, the stock reaching all-time highs as members of Parliament, even the King's mistress, were in on the stock and sold at just the right time before the collapse, the infamous South Sea bubble. Parliament, of course, than getting on the high horse and saying, well, we didn't do anything. We are now going to prohibit anybody from having a corporate charter with limited liability and publicly traded securities without permission of Parliament. Never mind that the South Sea Company had had a charter with permission from Parliament. The MPs, of course, having a substantial piece of the action. And then there's the infamous East India Company that Edmund Burke, the founder of modern conservatism, railed against in the House of Commons. The corruption of the East India Company, their influence, not only in the House of Commons, but in India itself, corrupting local government officials, Indian princes in the pay of the East India Company, and the cruel practices of that company, which led to the impeachment of the governor of India connected with the company, Warren Hastings, in the Commons and trial in the House of Lords. And East India Company sold tea. And the East India Company and the Parliament conceived a plan together because of corporate influence in the Parliament, a plan to require the colonists in America to buy their tea. The profits going to the East India Company, the taxes going to the treasury of the United Kingdom. Bostonians threw that tea into the harbor. And when that tea went into the harbor in the original Tea Party, the real Tea Party, not these folks are running around today in these goofy looking costumes pretending they are part of the Tea Party. That was a rebellion against corporate money in politics as much as it was a rebellion against Great Britain. It was taxation without representation because the American people had no voice in choosing the House of Commons. But you could bet the East India Company did. And just as with the South Sea Company in 1720, with the East India Company, you had MPs who were in their pay. This is an old problem. This is why the founders wanted to keep foreign money out of American politics. The Emoluments Clause of the Constitution that prohibits anyone holding a position of trust with the United States government from accepting any payments, emoluments from foreign governments, would also include corporations that are given the power of foreign governments, so connected with foreign governments, as was the East India Company, as are many corporations around the world today, would be covered by the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution because of the intrinsic link in many, many countries between government, the government apparatus, and the corporate apparatus.
So we're like we again have no representation.
We are right back there. And that's the point, that we've come full circle. And if we do not address this problem, and we don't get the money out of politics, the corporate money out of politics, we are right back where we were when that tea went into Boston Harbor. And we cannot assure ourselves that that's American corporate money. Corporate money is global. There are many, many companies now that are on the scale of the East India Company in those days, large conglomerates with connections to foreign governments in China and Russia, in the Middle East, throughout the world. And so our independence is at stake. And the threat here is that we have a Supreme Court of the United States and Citizens United and other cases that has interpreted the First Amendment of the Constitution so broadly to give speech rights to corporate entities, these same limited liability entities that corrupted the Parliament, that the founders rebelled against, tossed the tea into Boston Harbor, had a revolution, drafted the Constitution. And we have a court that has interpreted the Constitution in a way that is completely contradictory to what the founders believed was critically important to our independence. And money, the influence of money, you see it there in the Emoluments Clause. They understood the problem. They never would have imagined the First Amendment could be interpreted in a manner to give corporations, often with foreign government money, the ability to influence United States elections through this type of support for campaigns that we see today. So
And
this
that,
is an ancient problem.
and currently it's really a kind of an interesting thing. Several years ago, Governor Carlson and I spent some time discussing how corporate board members would feel about having to get shareholder approval for political contribution and expenditures. He felt that it would be way more work than a board member has signed on for. It's supposed to be an easy gig. And they'd most likely decide to not have corporations participate financially in elections at all. Now we see the fallout from participating, and Senator McConnell, who has spent his entire career helping to give corporations more constitutional liberty rights, is now trying to control what kind of corporate speech is permissible. What's your take on that?
I believe we are at a critical juncture where we can change corporate behavior for a number of reasons. And I've been working with Governor Arlie Carlson on a number of these issues. We've been fighting the influence of the sulfide mining companies in northern Minnesota. Both of those companies being controlled by foreign entities. One of them, Twin Metals, controlled by a billionaire from Chile, who also owned Bank of Chile, who also bought a house in Washington, D.C. to lease to Jared and Ivanka very conveniently in 2016, as soon as Trump won the election, to try and get that sulfide mining lease for Twin Metals. That's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. The other company called Polymet, that's controlled by a foreign corporation, Glencore, which initially just loaned them a lot of money. And then, of course, they get the mining permit in Minnesota, and boom, what do we have? We got Glencore controls 80% of it. Glencore is a big Swiss metals conglomerate. The CEO received the Presidential Medal of Friendship from President Vladimir Putin. They have a lot of deals with the Russian, Rusal and a bunch of the Russian companies. So bottom line is the sulfide mining debate in Minnesota. I've been very much involved with that with former Governor Arlie Carlson, is a perfect example of what we're talking about. In money influencing politics. Governor Carlson and I also have taken on, by the way, a political action committee that was formed by supported by 4 regents of the University of Minnesota, 2 former presidents of the University of Minnesota, who dumped a whole bunch of money in an outfit called Maroon and Gold. That's a political action committee that was schlepping money around the state legislature to influence the election of regents of the University of Minnesota. Arnie has a wonderful op-ed in the Minnesota Daily on that he put out there 2 weeks ago. And I'm continuing to hold the University of Minnesota, President Joe Gable, accountable on that. I hope everybody will. We cannot have regents of the university, former presidents of the university, try to influence regent elections with money and politics. So that's just one example of many. So Governor Carlson has it right. Let's talk about corporations. What can we do at the corporate level? I think corporations may want to change. There is a breakup with the Republican Party going on right now. They're not seeing eye to eye. We have Delta Airlines being threatened down at Georgia. My answer to that is come on back to Minnesota, bring them with Northwest, and bring corporate headquarters here. It'll be a lot better than Georgia if they don't want you. So bottom line is corporate America is getting fed up with the direction of the GOP. And that has to do with social issues, the conspiracy theories, the QAnon, the racists, and the rest of it. I was a Republican for 30 years. I left the GOP in 2018. I wish I could go back, but I'm not going to go back with these folks, the Trumpers. Corporate America is breaking up with the GOP. Now, where are they going to want to put their money? Do they want to give their money to the Democrats? A lot of them don't. A lot of corporations would probably be more than happy to stand down from politics if other corporations, competitors would too. So right now, what we've got is a collective action problem. If we could get the CEOs of the big corporations in a room, we might be able to get a lot of them to agree that we need to get corporate money out of politics. Even back in 2015, when I wrote my book on the taxation only with representation, I found a lot of data showing that corporate CEOs detested the role of money in politics. So now's the time to take advantage of that. If we can get corporations on board, what's the best vehicle for collective action? I am to think the stock exchanges. And right now, I'm working on a paper I'm going to release probably later today supporting the NASDAQ on a new rule on gender diversity and racial diversity on corporate boards that has extremely strong support in the investor community. The only people I've seen criticize that rule have been one far right-wing law professor at Harvard. So the corporate community is on board for some critical reforms, including gender and racial diversity on corporate boards of directors. I'd say money in politics is next. We
Good.
need to work with the stock exchanges, work with a business roundtable. Yes, these are the groups that many here may perceive as the enemy,
Mhm.
but we can go in there and I think we can work a deal because they're fed up with the GOP and they don't want to go with the Democrats. They're getting sick of writing checks, but they also don't want to see their competitors write checks when they're not. So we have a wonderful opportunity here for change, and I say we ought to take advantage of it.
Yeah, we'll need to figure out how to send the business roundtable a memo. We can have a memo drive. Everybody send them a memo.
Yes.
So when we talk about corporations, that includes LLCs, right?
Yeah, so the LLCs, there are two different ways of using the word LLC. A limited liability entity is in the United States now, we have LLCs, we have corporations, limited liability partnerships, a whole range of different limited liability entities. So most of the major corporations we think of aren't LLCs technically, they are corporations, but they are limited liability entities. And that's the critical problem here. And this goes back to the South Sea bubble of 1720, that they're limited liability. That's what Parliament focused on in the Bubble Act of 1720. You got these people form a company and they can make all the profits because limited liability, when all heck breaks loose, they walk away. Now, after the South Sea bubble, they put a couple of them in the Tower of London to show them that, well, limited liability company law isn't all there is. There's also the law of fraud. But fast forward 2018, Lehman Brothers. Okay, limited liability. They make all the money in the upside investment banking. And then when the fur hits the fan and it tanks, they walk. Anybody go to jail? No. So maybe we ought to bring back the Tower of London. I don't know. But at least let's get the money out of politics. Because if you look at the amount of money from the financial sector going into politics before and after the 2008 financial collapse, you could see exactly why we had the financial collapse. The regulators weren't watching. We were deregulating the financial services sector during both Democratic administrations and Republicans. By the way, I think the Clinton administration may have been even worse on deregulation than the Bush, because the Clinton administration did a lot of the deregulation. You had Treasury secretaries out of Goldman Sachs, Rubin, and then Larry Summers, the president of Harvard, who never saw a derivative security he didn't like. I don't think he saw a woman in science he did like, which is why he ended up getting fired as president of Harvard. But he was another one of these characters in the Clinton years who thought deregulate Wall Street. But why deregulate Wall Street? Why did it happen? Massive amounts of money from Wall Street went to both political parties in the 1990s. They repealed Glass-Steagall, the derivative securities market completely unregulated, and the Bush people come in 2001 and they just continue the same agenda. They did put in Sarbanes-Oxley in 2002. That helped a little, but it's generally deregulation till 2008. That financial crisis resulted in large part because of the influence of financial sector money in politics and our inability to keep up with the stuff they were peddling out of the big firms on Wall Street. Three so-called limited liability companies, Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, Merrill Lynch, tanked in 1 year, bankrupt. And that destroyed the economy. So yeah, there's liability, but the liability falls on us,
Yep.
the American people. And
And then
that's what we need to solve this problem.
And then I know that states are the ones who charter the LLCs and corporations, but I know I read that in the state of Delaware is very corporate friendly, and there's actually one address there that is home to like 30,000 different LLCs, and it's easier to form an LLC there. Than you need less identifying information than you do to get a driver's license, to register to vote, or even get a library card. I think there are like 4 states like that where you can start an LLC without naming any principal for that corporation. Is that correct?
Well, it's easy to start an LLC. I think that and you have some basic information. You often don't have to mention who actually is funding it, where the money's really coming from. And the reason this makes a difference is the big corporations, of course, we know who they are, but you can form an LLC that's a subsidiary, put the money there, and then that company passes the money to another entity. And then, and the second part of this conversation, we're going to talk about 501c4s and these independent expenditure organizations. So because of all the corporate entities involved, the big money from the companies we probably know exist out there that have the really big money, they don't put the money directly into a political campaign. They put it into an LLC or some other entity that then turns around and puts it in another entity, and then it flows through to a 501c4 that's running the tech ad on the candidate opposing whoever they do want to put into office. So given the sheer number of corporate entities and different shells that could be flying around there, it makes it very hard to detect where the money's coming from. And that, of course, is a serious problem with transparency. We not only have the money in politics, we have no idea where it's coming from because of all these different entities and all the different shell games going on.
And there's no so they influence, the LLCs spend to influence elections, and we don't know where their money comes from. It can come from all over the world because we don't have any identifying information of a lot of them. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, you have some identifying information. So, okay, so let's start with Glencore is a metals trader in Switzerland. That's the one that was founded by a man actually Mark Rich, who got a pardon from Bill Clinton on tax fraud. He was a fugitive of justice, and he somehow got himself a pardon, probably through money in politics. So there's Mark Rich founds Glencore. Glencore is the company is trading a lot with the Russians and close to the Russians and everybody else over there. They want to get into sulfide mining. So they form another company called Polymet. Now, Polymet's publicly traded in Canada, and presumably the shareholders own most of it. Glencore then advances a bunch of debt. So then the next step is the debt has to be paid off. Well, after you get the Minnesota mining permit for Polymet, you do the debt equity swap, and now Glencore controls most of Polymet. Now, we can track a lot of that. Of course, notice how they did the switch after they got the mining permits. Mm-hmm. Now, the question, everything starts to go dark. When you have different entities form, different other entities that may be promoting sulfide mining, some for-profit, some nonprofit, some trade associations, a lot of them limited liability entities or 501c4s or similar entities, the money starts to flow to different entities through joint ventures and so forth. And you have all these groups advocating for sulfide mining. Now, that money may have originated, the whole thing originated with Glencore in Switzerland, with the same people sitting at the table, and I got a picture of them right there at Reuters with Vladimir Putin at the big table in the Kremlin there. But you can track the money with the public companies to some extent, but then things go dark because a lot of LLCs, limited liability entities, and the 501c4s that we're going to talk about in a minute don't disclose their donors. So where's all the money coming from that's promoting sulfide mining in this state? I think I know, but I can't trace it.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was just over a veto of President Trump on January 1st of this year, the Corporate Transparency Act, CTA went into effect as part of the National Defense Authorization Act. And that was a rare bipartisan move. The CTA requires companies in the United States to file a report that provides the name, date of birth, and current address, and unique identification number from a passport or driver's license, for example, of the company's beneficial owners to the Bureau of the Treasury Department. So that information must be updated every year to reflect any changes. So that's a new thing. They have to identify themselves, but that's only to the government. We still don't know that information. Is that,
No, we
that's
don't.
correct?
I don't
Yeah.
think we can find it going, the government can find it out. And second, unfortunately, I mean, I think I strongly support that provision.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, there are ways around it. All you do is work a joint venture with an American company. And the understanding is the American company will take care of business in this legislature. And, you know, the foreign company will assume more of the burden, the financial burden of something else in the joint venture. And so that's going to be a common practice here with all these entities. So I think we really need to focus on the disclosure is going to help, but it can't be all and end all, because you're not going to get complete disclosure. There are too many different ways around it.
Mhm.
You also need to address directly the role of money in politics and counter it, either with regulation of the electioneering communications, which might require overturning Citizens United, and or with small dollar donors in there.
Yeah.
But this is directly tied to this limited liability problem, and I want to continue to reemphasize that. One of the things Governor Carlson and I have been talking about is on this polymet permit. You know, Glencore is not stepping to the plate at all. They're not going to guarantee. Well, we just got a guarantee from Polymet on that mine. That mine goes bad and it pollutes the Polymet mine. And Glencore is not guaranteeing anything to DNR. DNR took a guarantee from Polymet. Well, what's the capitalization of Polymet? That's pretty thin.
Mhm.
And why are we accepting that in Minnesota? Why is the governor accepting that? And I think that's the role of money in politics.
Yeah.
And why is the GOP jamming this thing down people's throat? These themes are tied. Limited liability means that company, whoever set that company up, is not responsible for the cleanup, whether it's cleanup on Wall Street after Lehman Brothers goes down, or cleanup after some sulfide mine pollutes the boundary waters of the Lake Superior watershed.
And nobody wants that. But so it's like a game of whack-a-mole, right? You close one loophole and another one opens, and you just have to keep going after the
Well,
the
yeah,
money.
it's also it's a mentality that's seeped into American society. I recommend everyone take a look, if they haven't taken it down, that website for this Maroon and Gold Rising. It's amazing. You'd have people say they're promoting the interests of the University of Minnesota. And you go to their website for their political action committee, it starts off saying, money is the mother's milk of politics. And that's why we're putting this money into the Minnesota legislature to people of the key committees in both parties to advance the agenda of the University of Minnesota. And this was done with the president of the University of Minnesota did not authorize this. Now, I think they looked the other way, and they should not have. Well, four current regents poured money into it. One of them, Ken Powell, is the former CEO of General Mills. I mean, you know, he made $50 million a year in that gig. And maybe he thinks that our board of regents is run like a corporate board and that that's the way you do business. But it's just not right.
Yeah.
But it's amazing. If our society has gotten that corrupt with money in politics, there's not just sulfide mining companies, but people think they're helping the University of Minnesota by literally bribing the legislature. When you look at it, literally describes a quid pro quo on that website.
Yeah. Wow.
And it's amazing. And that's what we need to stand up and say that's wrong. But that's where we are as a society.
Yeah, that's been normalized. And that brings us to 501Cs. I mean, Planned Parenthood to the NRA, trade associations, Chamber of Commerce, it's a really broad topic. Social welfare groups don't always seem to be working for the good of society. So how are these organizations used to influence elections? I know this is your area of expertise.
How does it influence elections? Well, first is the primary. That's what Larry Lessig of the Harvard Law School called the green primary. And he didn't mean the Green Party. He meant in both of the major political parties that who wins the primary is often determined by the money, and that the money people choose in the Democratic Party and in the Republican Party. And then you have the general election. So the vast majority of voters don't get to really have a decision-making role until November. And then they're given these two choices. Yes, you could vote in a primary, but who gets ahead in the money race in a primary affects who gets endorsements from other elected officials in a primary. And the role of money is astronomical and it's critically important. So that is a very important factor. Second, once people are in office, they are dependent on this money to stay in office. And if the money turns against you, you're out, because then the other person can raise more money, or you can get primary if you turn against the big money. So the money determines who wins primaries, and then once people are in office, it pins them down in terms of what they can do. People don't want to tick off their donors, and that's a big problem. The National Rifle Association is a group I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times back in 2010 called the NRA Protection Racket. And I was talking about how they pinned down a lot of people in the Republican Party, say, you deviate from our line on guns, just on anything, and we're going to primary you, take you out. By the way, Donald Trump's doing that right now to the Republican Party. It's a very, very dangerous thing. So bottom line is this is a serious concern. Money in politics has destroyed our primary system in particular, and even our general elections just have massive amounts of money on both sides. And you wonder, do the people really have a say?
Well, and that's what is the vehicle that the corporations also use 501c4s, right? For their expenditures, so they don't have to disclose any of that stuff.
Yes, and this is another end run around the law, because it was, I believe it's the 1909, the Tillman Act. This is under the Teddy Roosevelt administration. They said corporate treasury money can't be given to political campaigns. Well, they've obviously figured out ways around that. So it's been the law for 110 years. Corporations can't give money to political campaigns. First way to get around the Tillman Act was set up a political action committee. So you have a political action committee with the corporation's name on it, but it's not funded with the corporate treasury. What you do then is the corporation goes to all of its employees, to its suppliers, to its customers. If you want to be in good with the corporation, you give to the political action committee. And of course, the corporation, will take care of you. Now tell me that's not money out of the corporate treasury, right? And that money then is used to influence elections. So you got the Goldman Sachs Political Action Committee, they go on and on. Okay, now that's been going on for a long time. Then they came up with yet another way around. You could take money directly from the corporate treasury and give it to a 501c4. A 501c4 is an independent organization, so-called public interest organization. It's not a charity. That's a C3, but a C4 is a civic organization that will promote, and the original idea is the civic organization will promote various reforms, things that we need in society. It'd be a civic organization for police reform or for environmental reform or whatever it is. That was the original idea of the C4. Well, then the C4s started to advocate for certain candidates, and they would talk about candidates close to elections. And the C4s would get union money and they get corporate. So they started getting into not just issues, but they were talking about candidates and trashing candidates they didn't like right before elections. More corporate money comes in, more union money. Congress finally passes McCain-Feingold in 2000 and said, look, the C4s that are funded with the corporate money can't be making electioneering communications about candidates this close to an election within weeks, right up to an election. There's got to be a limit here because otherwise it's corporate money in politics direct. It's just basically what the Tillman Act prohibited in 1909. You're just doing it through a C4 instead of directly from the corporate treasury to the campaign. It's corporate treasury to C4. C4 is then making electioneering communications. So they set up a C4. They decided they wanted to violate the McCain-Feingold Act. And that was called Citizens Unite. They say, okay, we're going to have a bunch of corporate money. We're going to make a movie about Hillary, trash Hillary, and run it right before the 2008, I think, the primaries there. And, as they thought she might win, they're going to go after her in November. And that's the one that went up to Supreme Court. Supreme Court of the United States says, First Amendment, corporations have the right to give this money to C4. The C4 has the First Amendment right to trash Hillary all they want, up to the day before the election. And so now you could use the C4 entity as an end run around the original prohibition of the Tillman Act. You get the corporate treasury money right into the political campaign. Just do it through the C4. And the C4s, do they have to disclose their donors? No. President Obama did in a State of the Union speech, I believe, after Citizens United say we should require them to disclose their donors. Congress, Democratic controlled Congress wouldn't do it. Hey, both sides are getting their bread buttered. And they don't want people knowing where they're getting their bread buttered.
And those donations to the 501c4s are not tax deductible, but the groups themselves are tax exempt, correct?
Well, yeah, the groups are tax exempt. And while it's not deductible as a charitable contribution, if it's a business that's making those expenditures, those may be a business expense. And a business expense gets somewhat similar tax treatment to tax deduction for an individual. So there is a lot of pre-tax money flowing around depending on whether those expenditures are categorized as a business expense and going into those C4s. Then you got the C3s, the nonprofits. And the C3s also get a lot of money. We don't know where it comes from. A C3 is not just the Salvation Army or your local, a synagogue or church or whatever. C3 is also, let's say, the Heritage Foundation or the Federalist Society or the ACLU. I mean, all those groups are C3s too. So there are C3s with a very strong political agenda. Now, they still, under the tax law, aren't allowed to talk about candidates, but they can get around that because they just hammer home the issue. And then the C4 takes over and trashes the candidates. Usually, a lot of them, the candidates, it isn't talking about how good a candidate is, just trashing the candidate on the other side. So you have the C3 could say, abortion is murder, let's say. That's a right-wing, anti-abortion C3. They keep pushing that. You do all you want. All the billboards around town, they put up all over town with a, 6-month-old baby on the picture, and you're talking about, 2 weeks into pregnancy. I don't know, whatever. So that all C3 could do all that, right? All the misleading billboards all over town. Perfectly fine. But C3 can't mention candidate, right? Well, the C4 that's affiliated with the C3 then can come out and say, so-and-so is a baby killer. And that's just one example. You could flip it the other way. If you have a Planned Parenthood, can go the other route. And then Planned Parenthood could have a C4 that comes out and says, so-and-so is going to take away your right to choose, even if so-and-so didn't necessarily say they would reverse Roe v. Wade. They just were talking about 6 months. And my point is that you have the C3 does this work all the way up to talking about the candidate. Then the C4 takes over and usually trashes the candidate on the other side, often with a misleading misrepresentation of the candidate's position. And of course, the C3 may have misrepresented on the issue. So they could do the misleading billboards of the issue. So, and both sides play. And that's the song and dance going on there.
So is the 501c4 the one that's limited to not spending more than 49.9% of their donations on on issue advocacy, or where does that end it come in where the IRS has to
Yeah,
police
well, the
that kind of
IRS,
thing?
they have different with the C3s and C4s have some, and they're lobbying restrictions on the C3s, much less on the C4s. So there are different rules. I wouldn't want to give you the percentages on each one, but it also depends on how you define these different categories. Uh, the main difference, the issue advocacy, you can get a lot. I mean, that's up to 50%. It's a lot of money on issue advocacy. The key difference is the C4 can mention the candidates because it says, you know, it can trash candidates the day before the election. The C3 is not supposed to. Now, the C3s, the religious leaders on the right seem to think that's an infringement of the First Amendment right, that they can't get up and give a sermon about how evil some Democrat is. The more moderate religious groups don't seem to have a problem with that restriction. So far, that restriction on C3s has been upheld because it's a tax status. If I give money to the Episcopal Church here in town, I get a tax deduction. I don't if I give to a political campaign. And so the IRS, and I think the courts will uphold the provision of C3 that says that the priest at the church is not supposed to get up there and say, vote for Governor Walz, or talk about how the opponent is a sinner on Sunday before the Tuesday election. But there's been some pushback on that. But there's still the general distinction is C4 under Citizens United can talk candidates all they want, even though Congress and McCain-Feingold told them they couldn't, and they get massive amount of corporate money. C3s can get corporate money too, and individual donations that are tax deductible. They can talk issues a lot, but they can't talk candidates. And then they also, some of them get into the gray area. For example, when Joe Biden shows up for communion and somebody says, I'm not giving you communion, well, why not? Well, whatever, we know that story. So the point is, you get a lot of this going on. And it's when the corporate money gets in there. And I will say one thing is I mentioned these social issues like abortion and guns and the rest of it. You got a lot of corporations put money into those campaigns that couldn't give a, you know what, about abortion on either side of the issue or guns or anything else. They just want some politician out of there who's going to regulate them. But they think that the way to do that is to run ads on an emotionally driven social issue and to focus on that rather than on their issue. Because if their issue is, let's say you should deregulate utility companies. I mean, that's a really exciting ad that's really going to get people motivated to deregulate utility companies because we all love paying our electric bill.
Yeah.
But if the utility company funds a pro-life or pro-choice, whatever group, to get rid of a politician they don't like, you can find people who may not like their utility bill. They're mad as heck at the utility company, but they're pro-life or they're anti-abortion, whatever you want to call it. And the utility company's funding the candidate running against the pro-choice person, and they don't know it, and they're going to vote for the person who's going to get in there, and of course, help the utility company jack up the utility bill. And so a lot of money is flowing into these campaigns from people, actually into these issues, from people who don't care about the issue. They're just using the issue.
They're riding it. They're riding along.
They're riding the issue in order to get their money in and get their person in who's going to take care of business for them. But they know that if they directly funded their cause, that it wouldn't work because, as I say, I mean, how much excitement are you going to get if people really want to pay more to XL Energy? I'm not accusing XL Energy of doing this, but it might turn off the lights here. But you know, it's a concern.
Yeah, and disclosure is only going to go so far. I mean, even though you know who's spending the money, it's, you know, those issue ads are easy to manipulate people. We do have to get the money out of politics. That's really the only way forward. But I think we've got some questions. Marie, do you got some questions to pop at us?
So we'll just read these out right out of here. So let me just go back to the beginning here. There was a good one early on. So Linda Larson, who asked a question, how can citizens influence the corporate leaders to leave politics? You had talked about that this might be a moment for corporations to decide to exit the money race.
Well, um, I think there's a good opportunity because of the attacks on corporations from particularly the right wing of their GOP. Uh, I don't see corporations willing to wholeheartedly embrace the Democrats. Now, we have seen sometimes over the past 20 or 30 years. I mean, Wall Street certainly fell in love with Bill Clinton, and that showed with the deregulation of Wall Street in the Clinton years. So corporations have funded Democrats, but still, a lot of corporate money traditionally has gone to Republicans. And I think a lot of corporate leaders are increasingly fed up with both parties and don't see advantages that they can get from allegiance, particularly in a highly polarized political environment, with one party or the other. I mean, think about when Target got messed up with the governor's race, when Tom Emmer was running against the Dayton or whatever, and Target put some money in, and oh, they got a lot of grief. Um, and a lot of corporations just want to stay out of this fray, particularly after the era of Donald Trump, where it's become violent, the rhetoric is vicious, the conspiracy theories. I mean, if you're trying to do business and sell to Democrats and Republicans, whether it's Target stores or anywhere else, you just want out. And so I see corporate America wanting out more and more. And the attacks from the right wing of the GOP on everywhere from Delta Airlines to attacks on the social media companies for taking Trump off Twitter. And it's amazing. You have people in the far right of the GOP who say that Twitter and Facebook don't have the First Amendment right. It's our private companies to say who can use the platform and who can't. They're private companies. I know they're publicly held with public shareholders, but they aren't the government. And they take Trump off. They can take Trump off. If I'm running a platform, I'm a company, I own the platform, but I don't want people spewing racism, or I don't want people going on the platform saying we need to have an insurrection up on Capitol Hill. I want to take those people off if I can. And so the same people defend the First Amendment right of corporations to free speech and Citizens United turn around and saying, okay, but you got to put Trump back on Twitter. I mean, it's ridiculous. So corporate America, I think, is fed up. It's a perfect opportunity to, with this breakup of this relationship that, that Mitch McConnell may have had a lot of CEOs enthralled to, 15 years ago, is to get in there and say, okay, now we need to all get out together, because I don't want to get out if my competitors still in. Because then my competitor is going to grease the skids. And funny, guess who gets regulated? I get regulated.
Yep.
So I want everybody out. So we need collective action, Bob. That's why I say we should actually think about going to the exchanges. And after I finish with this project with the National Association of Securities Dealers, we're trying to get the SEC to approve their rule on gender diversity, racial diversity on listed companies, boards of directors. I'd like to have a conversation with them, and with the New York Stock Exchange, about whether we could have some listing requirements where companies would voluntarily say, we are not going to put money into C4s. We're going to put it on our securities filings that we do not put money in C4s, which means if they do, they're going to get sued under the securities laws. I think we can build up support for this. Corporate America wants out.
Well, that would be good. And actually that segues into the next question, which Nancy Morgan, who's a American Promise leader from Virginia, asked, what is corporate America's perspective on the move to amend HJ Res 48 that includes the the distinction that there's no civil rights for corporations. And she also asks about HJ Res 1. What do you think that corporate America feels about HJ Res 1?
Yeah, I haven't gone and found out what the corporate, what kind of lobbying is going on in that for the Business Roundtable and other groups. I think that to get support from corporate entities on reforms, it's best to have piecemeal reforms that focus on very specific issues so they don't feel threatened by something else that's unrelated. So I have wanted to stress the importance of for money in politics and focus on money in politics. There are other problems with corporate behavior that are very problematic. And I feel strongly about, for example, climate change and a bunch of things going on. But I think we ought to address them separately. To put together a coalition is basic public choice theory. You need to get to assemble a majority. The majority I can get on one particular reform may not match the majority I can get on another. If I collapse the two together, I can take two majorities and turn it into a minority. So the problem with a number of these bills is there's too much in them. And so they try to address too many different issues, and then a corporation feels threatened by one provision of the bill, and so they're not going to support it. And this is why I've urged that we have bills that focus on particular issues. I support, for example, HR 1, but there's an awful lot in there. And we may not be able to get that through the Senate, depending on whether they break that filibuster. I strongly support HR 1, but I think it might be better to push some of these problems piecemeal and have very particular reforms we want and try and assemble a majority and then go on to the next issue. Rather than these larger comprehensive bills, they have lots of different pieces. So, but that one, I haven't seen what the reaction, of course, different industries are going to react differently. There's some companies and some industries going to say we benefit, others are going to say, actually, if it hurts our competitors, it helps us. And so you can get corporate reaction to these bills all over the map.
So Vicki and I had actually had a question that we sort of decided that we wanted to make sure that we asked you. So how would you, since we've talked about LLCs and 501Cs, what would you say are their form of interaction with the political action committees and super PACs? I think you touched on this a little bit in different parts of what you've said today.
Well, they're not supposed to be coordinating. The campaigns are not supposed to coordinate with the C4s, and the super PACs aren't supposed to coordinate. So a lot of people aren't supposed to be coordinating, at least too much, and they're not supposed to get caught. That's what's basically going on. There's a lot of wink, wink, nod, nod, and there is coordination, and that's another key role for C3 sometimes. They're actually bringing people in for conferences to share ideas. And they're bringing them in from people with candidates and campaigns and C4s and people running super PACs. And they're all coming to some conference to share ideas with the C3 as the umbrella organization. Yeah, they're sharing ideas. They're also coordinating what they're going to do to get their ideas, jammed through the legislature in a bill or something, or defeat a candidate. And so there's a lot of coordination, and we don't know we can't prove it because they usually, with the help of good lawyers, keep themselves on the right side of the line when it comes to the coordination. I'm gonna go back to this example at the University of Minnesota with this this political action committee, Maroon and Gold Rising. The president of the university sends an email to the regents saying, okay, if you guys want this, you can do it in your personal capacity, individual capacity, but we, the University of Minnesota, can't have anything to do with it. That's basically Joe Gable's email to the regents. So 4 of these guys put the money into it. I look at the webpage, they got University of Minnesota trademarks from our 5 campuses on the webpage. And they got photographs. And one photograph was of a lab worker working here. And this is being used to raise money for political action committee. It'd be like you took a picture of me in the classroom, used to raise money for Donald Trump. I think I get a little upset. But so this is an independent group. There's nothing to do with the university. But somebody says they could use the trademarks. Somebody says they could use these photographs. So I read a really strong letter to the president of the university, copied some of the regents. And a couple of days later, I hear back, oh, we've decided not to let them use the trademarks. And we changed our mind, even though it was perfectly okay for them to use the trademarks before. So the point is, wink, wink, nod, nod. There's an awful lot of this going on. And if it's going on at public university, think about what's going on, with 3M. I mean, 3M's a great company, but look, we know what happens. And we know what happens in corporate America. There's a lot of wink, wink, nod, nod going on. And that's what we really need to hold people accountable for. And that's why Governor Carlson and I have both called for an investigation of this thing with this Maroon and Gold PAC by the legislature. And yeah, read Governor Carlson's op-ed in the Minnesota Daily on that. And by the way, read his op-eds in the Duluth Tribune about the sulfide mining and the corruption there. That we're our most valuable asset in this state is our clean water, and we're about to lose it to foreign-owned companies because there's been no transparency in the process on those sulfide mining leases and the permits, and of course the leases from the federal government. And it's a travesty.
Well, and the Minnesota Daily is the University of Minnesota newspaper, right?
That's our student newspaper. Our student
Okay.
reporters are good.
Okay,
On
so
top
we
of
can
these
look that up there then. That's good.
Well, they
That'll-
published Star Trib. Star Trib eventually got around to picking up the story about this political action committee.
Yeah,
But Minnesota Daily, at least for the stuff going on here, is very, very good. And by the way, up north, I recommend that Timberjay up in Ely. Very good newspaper. They picked up stories on the sulfide mining stuff that the Star Trib won't touch, and the Duluth Tribune they won't touch, but the Timberjay has been very, very
Okay.
good. So some of these smaller papers, I mean, independent journalism is absolutely critical in this country.
oh yeah, and that's good to know, the Timberjay. Okay. Well, I think we've gone way over. So I really appreciate you spending time with us, Richard. It's always such a pleasure to get your input on what's going on with our elections and money in politics and everything that's going on around us that we know we can fix it. It's hard, but we are making progress. So American Promise is on track to have the amendment proposed and ratified by 2026. So we all just need to make sure that we keep pushing at that. So any parting words, Richard?
I want to thank everyone for joining us, and continue, please, to put pressure on our state legislators, our governor, our members of the House of Representatives, United States Senate, all of our elected officials to address the role of money in politics and demand accountability. Focus on the specific issues too, and how money is affecting specific issues, whether it's the election of the regents of the board of the University of Minnesota, the granting of mining permits, or local issues are illustrative of a much larger problem. And if we could expose corruption at the local level, and these particular instances in which money is being used or abused to influence our political system, we can underscore the importance of campaign finance reform and passing this amendment. When people see how it affects them, their clean water, who's elected to the Board of Regents of the University of Minnesota, and one of the big issues, by the way, there is tuition. Look at the cost of higher education in America, not just in Minnesota. It is driven sky high because special interests are influencing the boards of trustees, the regents of state universities around the country. And the foreign money, by the way, that is infiltrating our major universities, public and private, from countries all over the world. Our country is in serious trouble if we don't go back to what the founders believed in, which is independence of influence of money, particularly money from overseas, and the right of the people to taxation only with representation. And I want to leave with that. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today.
Thank you.